Hi, and welcome to another edition of Studio 411. I'm your host, Larry Dasilva. We've got a very interesting show today. We have two guests, both joining us from points not so near. One, yes, one on the left coast, as they say. We have a gentleman who is perhaps better known as one of the most respected and admired talent agents of the Hollywood Golden Age, and into his 8th decade is still working as feverishly as before. I'm talking about the legendary Bud Burton Moss, who is the author also of a book called Hollywood, Sometimes the Reality is Better Than the Dream, published by Waterside Productions. Bud, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to spending some time with you and Regina.
A pleasure. And we have also joining us from the New York City area, Regina Gill. Regina is the founder and executive director of the Gold Coast Arts Center in Great Neck, Long Island, New York. Welcome, Regina. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Larry. Hello to you and to Bud.
Very good, very good. And you say, well, that's a great pairing, but what do they have in common? Well, Bud, of course, besides being a longtime Hollywood agent, and Regina working on this side of the pond with the Gold Coast Arts Center, they have teamed up to work on a project over the last couple of years, which we will talk about. As a matter of fact, we'll start now. Regina, tell us a little bit about now the event that if I understood correctly, you're usually having almost every October. Is that pretty much a month that's etched for this event?
We've been in existence as the Gold Coast Arts Center for the last almost 25 years. And from the Gold Coast Arts Center emerged the Gold Coast International Film Festival. And it's because of the film festival that we had the privilege of meeting Bud. What was it, Bud, in 2011, I think?
had 2012.
2012.
I had 2012.
When we had him come out to talk about his book, and we had him out at a time when we had our annual benefit fundraiser for the Art Center, which is a not-for-profit, and discovered that Bud is an extremely interesting man in his own right, and certainly the stories he has to tell are fascinating. So we staged a whole evening around Bud telling his story and sharing his experiences with the Hollywood elite.
And of course, Bud, as Regina well knows, old school Hollywood talent agency, part of a family dynasty that certainly did wonderful things back in the 20th century during the motion picture heyday, at least in Hollywood. Bud, your dad, Louis B. Moss, was a film editor at Fox. When did he start working there?
He was working there mid to late 30s and into the war, and then he started working over at Universal with a branch from the Army, and he had a lot of motion picture people that were in the service doing documentaries for the government at that time.
And so a lot of the similar to the ones that like Frank Capra and those folks produced, the Why We Fight.
That is correct.
There you go.
That is correct.
And your mother's brother was a gentleman named Sam Zimbalist. Any relation to the Ephraim Zimbalists, or no?
We're second cousins to Ephraim and to Stephanie, but many people, needless to say, forgot that going back to the late 20s, early 30s, probably one of the great violinists in that period was the original Ephraim Zimbalist. Truly one of the great violinists.
So several generations, of course, leading up through now this time, Stephanie, who many may remember from her days as Remington Steele, still acting and still performing. And so I see the family connection there. Sam Zimbalist produced films for MGM Studios, many acclaimed as the best films of all time. So quite an environment you grew up with. And tell me now, as a young boy, you were exposed to this in many ways, and you even wound up working as a young teenager in several films as extras.
I went from parking cars across the street from MGM to a busboy at 20th Century Fox Studio, and that's how I got to meet all these actors from the 30s and the 40s, and that's where I first saw Rita Hayworth in a film that my dad cut called Blood and Sand. And from the moment I saw her on the screen, I leaned over to my mom and I said, "Mom, she's almost as beautiful as you are. She has red hair." And that started a lifelong journey to eventually to meet her and to become her agent and to travel with her until that ill-fated period of her life when she contacted Alzheimer's. And I was right there to the end when she passed away, and I was one of her pallbearers along with Glenn Ford and Tony Franciosa and Cesar Romero. It was a long, great journey in many ways, and then a very sad journey at the end.
Now we have a shot of, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been one of the first times that you met Rita Hayworth. We have a shot of you, I want to say early 60s, along with Bing Crosby and Rita Hayworth. Now that, not going back that far, but in the late 60s, 70s, a lot of people misunderstood that disease and thought that, you know, she was having issues of another sort. So I'm sure that
most people thought she was a drunk and they could never find a bottle around at the time.
Yeah, and that did not help her career. Although at that point she wasn't as busy as she had been certainly during
in the 40s and 50s.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. If I'm not mistaken, I think several years ago when one of the major periodical pieces did a 100 greatest actors and actresses. She was in the top 25 as far as females of the motion picture during the 20th century.
That was the AFI, the American Film Institute.
There you go.
Correct.
Thank you. Now, Regina, now you, I read in your bio now, a visual artist. Explain what is a visual artist?
What is a visual artist?
Yes, I mean an artist, in other words, with a painter, or just like, in other words, that when I read that, I wasn't quite sure where to go with that. So what?
The arts are typically divided in two. You're either a visual artist or a performing artist.
Gotcha.
So if you're a visual artist, you could be a painter, a sculptor, a ceramicist, etc.
There you go.
Photographer. Those are all visual artists. Anything that's done for you to look at.
Okay.
A performance artist, a performing artist is a movie star, theater actor, etc.
Could be a mime, etc. Anything that involves,
Absolutely.
involves
all called performers.
exactly,
Sure.
performing in front of an
And then there's
audience.
the blend where you've got the performance arts,
Yeah.
where you have people who use theater arts to create a visual experience. The lines are blurring in modern art.
And now you tell us a little bit about now your early start. Now you began or spent some time at the famous High School of Music and Art in Manhattan. I guess that better known to folks as that was the inspiration for the film and later TV series Fame, correct?
Yep, and it was, there are very few people who use their high school, still put their high schools on their resumes. But I don't know anybody who went to music and art who doesn't still list that as well as their college or other professional accomplishments. It was, and I understand as LaGuardia, which is its new incarnation, that it remains one of the preeminent high school experiences for talented kids.
And now from there, how did you then, I think you've been with the precursor to the what's now called the Gold Coast Arts Center. You've been involved with this for quite a while, correct?
Well, I'm the founder.
You're the founder. There you go.
I've been involved with it since it was in my kitchen.
Aha. All right. So tell us a little bit about how did that come about? What inspired you back when to provide this this venue for not only young people but older folks like Bud and I?
It came out of a lot of different things. One of the things that came out of was my genuine dismay in moving to a suburban community. At that time, I was raising my children in Great Neck, and I had moved here because there had been an art center here where Louise Nevelson and Twyla Tharp and some amazing artists and performers had lived. Listen, right down the street from here, we had, and this is going to be another reference that your boys over there in the studio won't know, and that was, what's her name? Oh, now I'm going to forget. They called her the Big Mouth.
Oh, Martha Ray.
Martha Ray,
Yes,
thank
yeah.
you. She lived down
Paladin
the
later
street.
on, but certainly a big comedic actress, certainly going back to when Bud started out in the business, as well as a movie star, a TV performer, and a nightclub performer, indeed.
Well, see, the history of this region is that this was Hollywood before Hollywood. This is where Charlie Chaplin lived with his then-wife Paulette Goddard in her uncle's house in Great Neck Estates. Charlie Chaplin, in fact, started one of the first little embryonic United Artists offices in the same space where we have now got the Gold Coast Art Center. So there's F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote The Great Gatsby literally 1 mile down the road. So you had Sid Caesar and Groucho Marx and Oscar Hammerstein and Alan King, and oh my God, the list goes on. It was quite a list of celebrities and talents who lived here because they were working in the city, and they were shooting in the Palisades in Jersey.
Of course, 2/3 of that one would have been, of course, Broadway, the Great White Way. Secondly, would have been the early advent of television in the late 40s and throughout the 50s, et cetera. And then even going back prior to Bud entering the world, you mentioned Charlie Chaplin. So many others had, back in the early days, the teens, the 1920s, there were motion picture studios that started out in the New York vicinity.
Exactly.
In Chicago.
And Chicago, really? That I did not know. Before, of course, they all tended to move out to the coast. Let me just say for the viewers, the Gold Coast Arts Center is a 5013 organization dedicated to promoting the arts through education, exhibition, performances, and outreach. It's located on the North Shore of Long Island. You folks, which is probably where the name came from, call it the Gold Coast, obviously for many of the reasons you've stated already.
It was a name that was coined because you had, in the days before air conditioning, all the then equivalent of billionaires, they didn't go to the Hamptons. This was the Hamptons before the Hamptons. So they built their mansions for the summer season out here. And they brought all these entertainers out here and kept them on the grounds to entertain and to make their company, their very distinguished guests, very happy.
Bud Burton Moss joining us here on Studio 411, the book Hollywood. Regina Gill, founder, executive director of the Gold Coast Arts Center of Long Island. And now tell me, Bud, what's been the greatest pleasure working with Regina during these last several years?
Well, without sounding too dramatic, my dear friend, Regina is quite a remarkable lady, and I say this with great fondness. She doesn't know the word no, and she's like a terrier who gets a hold of your cuff, and she keeps pulling on it and pulling on it and pulling on it until the terrier gets exactly what he wants. She's quite unique, very special, hard worker. She amazes me with the way that she handles all of these little things, throwing everything up in the air like a juggler. She's quite remarkable.
And now, Regina, the kind of tit for tat, I'll ask you the same question. What's been the greatest pleasure in your association with Bud?
Bud is a real old school, first class gentleman. This is a person who is, he can be even irritated and annoyed. And I know that I irritate you and annoy you, so don't say that I don't, Bud. But he will never reply with anything but courtesy. He's a lovely, lovely man. And when you read his bio and you realize his accomplishments, there are people with half his accomplishments who are incredibly rude, short-tempered, and demanding. And he is none of those things.
So he's the opposite of me, is what she's trying to say.
Thank you, my dear friend. I appreciate it.
There you go. And again, I want to touch base again with these fine folks who are joining us. Coming up in October, you guys are honoring the second annual Gold Coast Awards that you give out. This year is going to be, well, I'll let you tell it, Regina. It will come right from your mouth. Tell us who the honoree is for this event upcoming.
Did you want me to do that now?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we'll.
Okay. On October 24th, 2018, at the legendary home of John Philip Sousa, we are going to be hosting a spectacular but intimate event where we will present Hollywood royalty, Robert Wagner, with our it's our Burton Moss Hollywood Golden Era Award, and it'll only be the second time we're presenting it. The first one was last year when we presented it to Rita Hayworth posthumously, where it was accepted by her daughter, Princess Yasmin Aga Khan.
There you go. And now just to get that out there for folks need more information, what's the website that kind of fills everybody in on what they need to know?
It's the Gold Coast Arts Center, so it's www.goldcoastarts.org.
Very good, very good. And Bud, now of course, the committee that's been assembled for putting this thing together, besides Regina and her fine staff, I mean, you've got some heavy hitters here: Joel Gray, Larry King, Richard Thomas. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing her name. I'm marveled at this woman, Edwina Sandys. Am I pronouncing that correct?
The silent Y, Sands.
Sands, thank you. Tippy Hedrick.
Edwina Sands, Larry, if I might cut in here, is probably one of the most unique, talented, inventive international artists and sculptors. She created the trophy that has now become quite well known. I think you have a picture of it, if I remember
correctly. Yeah, we do. We have an image of the award, if we can show that Miss Sands has created. A marvelous looking award, to say the least. There it is, right there.
And that's being held in the gentle hands of Regina Gill.
There you go. Oh, I thought it was actually being held by Princess Yasmin. There you go. But
no, she's holding him. And Edwina Sands, by the way, is the granddaughter of the legendary Sir Winston Churchill.
Yeah, that's what I came to realize, and I said, my goodness, that is someone who has just got stories almost equaling your stories. Now,
more than mine.
Has she written a memoir, may I ask? Does anyone know?
Has she written a memoir?
Yes.
I don't know. Regina?
Edwina has written many books.
Oh, really? There you go.
She's written books about her grandfather and what it was like to grow up and spend her time with him and her grandmother Clementine, and also how he encouraged her to be an artist because he so loved painting himself.
Now, talking about this event and the arts in general, I was curious to hear your comments with all that's going on in the country and the world around us. How are the arts doing? It seems to me that it just becomes tougher and tougher with monies and donations and funding to make programs like what you do for so many deserving children, and the fine programs that I've seen that you've put on, but just not Gold Coast in general. I'd like your opinion on how difficult it is. Has it gotten more and more difficult to maintain the funding and the programs that you folks try to do?
I have to say that it would be a lie if I told you that this is one of my favorite parts of the job, because in Manhattan it's actually easy. As soon as you leave Manhattan, it feels like everything outside of the urban situations, everything in the suburban or rural, actually rural is easier, because when you only have one art center and you have to go 100 miles to find another one, people will support it. But when people are living close to an urban place and they think that they're going to go there, it's harder to get them to focus on their local resources. The arts are the first things to be cut, and we need them more than ever. We have an extremely violent and anxious society, and it seems to me that this is the time when people should be should be really experiencing and learning more about how the arts can be integrated into their regular lives. So that's how we sell it. We work with people with Alzheimer's, and that's how Yasmin has been so appreciative of what we do, because she is obviously a champion for Alzheimer's research and to find the cure for this terrible thing. But through music and art and film and dance, we have seen remarkable things happen to those patients who show up at our art center to go through a program called Making Memories. There's suddenly a memory will be triggered. I mean, the arts have applications way beyond what people think. It's not just about sitting in a theater and watching somebody dance. It's about experiencing it and seeing how much it means to you and what kinds of emotions it will trigger for you. I believe in it 100%, and I know that it works, and I know that on a national level, the Kennedy Center has been working for years to try and bring the level of arts awareness into people's minds and lives.
Regina Gill, founder, executive director, Gold Coast Arts Center in Great Neck, Long Island, joining us, and also Bud Burton Moss, Hollywood agent, author of the book Hollywood, published by Waterside Productions. Again, just marvelous stuff you guys are doing, and again, the presentation of the Burton Moss Hollywood Golden Era Award. Talk us through a little bit. We'll start with Bud, because again, so many of these folks I'm sure you brought on board, because some of them are not necessarily local here to the Northeast. Talk us through the process in terms of each year, how the honoree gets determined.
Well, from my point of view, and I say this once again with great thanks and appreciation for Regina creating this concept of an award to pay honor and to pay tribute to those actors of the golden years of Hollywood. And we've kind of framed it from the 30s up until 1959. Those 30 years were probably the most important years for so many actors that made their careers during this period. And then, which is part of our tribute, there are actors, and I'm going to run off a handful of names that nobody's going to even know today, but these are the actors that helped make all of these great films, along with working with people like the Gables and the Tracys and the Hepburns and the Lombards. There were actors like John Carradine, who goes back to films like Blood and Sand, films like The Great Desert Thing, where people were starting. I just went blank on that film, Regina. Actors like Claude Rains, Arthur Kennedy, Basil Rathbone. Probably not one of your listeners today really realized that these were truly some of the great actors of Hollywood. And through people like Robert Wagner, who was there during that period, he's our poster boy for that period. And I can't think of another actor that is more committed and dedicated to making this tribute in my name important. And each year, through the advisory board that we have, there are going to be a lot of actors and actresses out there that we're going to seek out to try and bring into the festival and pay tribute to them. A lot of them, unfortunately, are too old, like we were talking about Olivia de Havilland recently, who's 92 years young and lives in Paris. And she was truly, with her sister Joan Fontaine, one of the great, great actresses of the 30s and 40s and into the 50s. But she is living in Paris and doesn't travel. But there's a lot of them out there, and I'm sure between Regina and our group of people, we'll come up with somebody for next year that's going to be just as important and just as memorable as our dear R.J. Wagner.
And we've got a photo, actually a recent photo of you and Robert Wagner. Again, you and I'll throw in another name, Oscar winner, mainly known as a Broadway performer, but still won a Best Supporting Actor, Joel Grey, who not only is on the committee, but you guys apparently all grew up together. So tell me a little bit about that, from going as far back as early school years. The three of you.
I went to junior high school with RJ in Westwood, and then I went over to high school with Joel. His father's name was Mickey Katz. He was one of the great kosher vaudevillians of the 30s and 40s. And Joel was always following his dad wherever he went. And Joel was somebody that we spent a lot of time with. We did Junior Miss in high school. We did Our Town in high school. We worked together. And he always used to get upset because I would tell him that I always used to get billing before him, and he would always get upset by that.
Oh my goodness, it's just a who's who. Regina, since you've known Bud, and I'm sure again you came in contact with some people during the several years you've been running this fine center, but again, it must amaze you at the exposure you get to so many well-known names through Bud.
Actually, it's surreal.
Before me, excuse me for interrupting you. I mean, there were people that she worked at the early days of the festival, like Francis Ford Coppola, who I think grew up in that neighborhood, that was there at her festival.
He went to high school here.
She's had some major people long before even I came along.
There you go. Now, somebody said, did you go to school with Francis? No.
He went to Francis Ford Coppola. Did I go to school with him?
Yes, I thought somebody said they went to school with Francis.
It
No.
wasn't me. He went to high school here in Great Neck.
Oh,
He's
okay.
a little bit older than I am, but
yes, yeah.
He graduated, I think, in 1956 or 57. And when we honored him in 1997, and he talked about how much he appreciated the families his family, they were very concerned about him, that he was either going to be arrested or that he was a genius. They weren't sure what was going on with him. But the families of his friends here were very supportive, and he still had very fond memories of his years here in Great Neck.
Now, you bring that up, or actually Bud brought it up. Now, besides Bud's connections, how do you get well-known artists to support you, Regina? What's your magic secret?
I have to tell you, most artists are extremely generous, the real ones. For example, I had an occasion to sit literally at a lunch where I happened to be sitting next to Gabriel Byrne. And most of these people, unless you're somebody like Bud, you're an agent or you're a studio head or somebody who can further their career, many of them don't really, they'll say, hi, what do you do? And move on. But Gabriel just said, what do you do? And I founded this not-for-profit art center and film festival. Oh, tell me more. And by the time I was done, he kept asking more questions. He then said, well, how can I help? And we had him come out. It was the first, he put us on the map. It was just amazing. He came out and he brought a film that he had done with his then wife, Ellen Barkin, and talked to the audience. And it was a packed house, as you can imagine, and couldn't have been more accessible. Drove himself in from Brooklyn. I mean, just the nicest man. And after that, it was easy. It was just easy.
Now, Bud, getting back to your early years, I saw my notes here, and I have to ask because when I go back and look at these movies now, you were an extra on It's a Wonderful Life, correct?
I was there when the dance floor opened up, and everybody was doing the Charleston, and
really?
Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed weren't looking behind them. They were hard at work in this contest, the Charleston, and all of a sudden they just kept going closer and closer to the railing, and the people didn't yell at them that they're going to fall in, and they finally fell in. And as they started to fall in, I was one of maybe 200. I keep looking even today. I ran part of the film the other day. I still, after all these years, know approximately where I was when I went into the water, but I never was able to find myself.
Were you on the left?
I'm going to look for you.
Were you on the left side as we watched the film, or were you on
That
the
is
right
correct.
side? You were on the left side, okay. And of course, the guy with one of his other buddies that pulled the switch, if you recall, was Alfalfa Schweitzer. Who
That is correct. Good for you.
Yeah, he was unbilled, which tells you where his career was at that point. But I remember seeing that, and it was like, wow. So now you were in there. That's right up there with like Phil Collins at the Beatles' Hard Day's Night Show. I mean that's remarkable. And then you were also, along with a lot of folks, and this was total coincidence that I happened to be looking at this several months ago. I was watching the movie The Ten Commandments. And
I was there. I hope you saw me when I was there when they yelled, "We're ready when you are, CB." I was just on the other side when the guy was yelling that, and then he fell off the chair.
Really? Wow, that's amazing. And then a gentleman that I unfortunately didn't get to know, we had a young lady, a young director who did a movie within the last year or 2 years before he passed. In that movie also, and became a good friend of yours, if not also a client, Robert Wagner. Or not Robert Wagner, Robert Vaughn, I beg your pardon. So he was in the Ten Commandments, but only as an extra as well.
Robert Vaughn and I met in college in 1948 and became very, very close. We did summer stock together. And when I left college, I went into the Air Force, and we got caught up after the Korean War. And even though we had another agent at the time, we remained friends, and I represented him briefly towards the last couple of years. Not quite then until he passed away.
Yeah.
But he was a good friend, a good actor.
And lived here in Connecticut for many, many years.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
You also knew another former our gang guy, later known as the Little Rascals. You also, I guess, went to school with Bobby Blake, later known as Robert Blake. So
I'm one of the few people that are left that can still get away calling him Bobby.
Okay, and he is still with us, as well as Joel Grey. And of course, for those who don't know, Robert Blake was in the marvelous 70s show Beretta, and also gained fame as the killer in Truman Capote's adaptation of his book called In Cold Blood. So yeah, you have just,
correct.
and I mean, I am just
Correct.
scratching the surface. The 2 books that Bud has done here, we're talking a little bit about his most recent one called Hollywood, as well as speaking with Regina Gill, founder and executive director of the Gold Coast Arts Center in Great Neck, and also talking about their event that's coming
Film
up.
Festival.
A film festival, yeah, that's honoring Robert Wagner in less than a couple of months.
24th.
Yeah, in October. He is sharp. It's amazing. I have more memory cells that I've lost than Bud. Can you believe that, Regina? How sharp he is.
That's funny.
He is. I barely know what I had for breakfast, and he's texting me and emailing me at like 5 o'clock in the morning. Of course, Bud thinks it's already daylight where I am. He doesn't realize it's still dark. But no, we get it out, and it's a pleasure. It's an honor to work with this gentleman, by all means. Now, Regina, again, give me kind of a feel for, you do so much with programs for young children, with your arts center. Again, share with the folks a little bit about where the money goes, in addition to the film festival, some of the things that you folks do for the broad community out there in Long Island.
Thank you. Actually, that's one of the things that I want people to understand, is that tuition doesn't pay for those kids who can't afford it, and we'll take those kids every day of the week. We send our teachers out. That's what the outreach piece is, so that we are actually helping bring art, music, dance, and theater into about 10 or 14 different school districts, and between 12 and 15,000 kids at one time were benefiting from having our teachers there, because they were sitting in school from 2:30 to 5:30 waiting for their parents to come pick them up after work. But really, they called it homework time, but we made that time very valuable for them, and they really, the teachers, the principals. And the reason we are necessary is because their budgets got slashed. The first thing that gets cut in a school education budget, it's not the sports program, it's the arts program.
arts, music, languages, all that. Believe me, I've seen it firsthand, and it's remarkable that the slashing that goes on. But again, with folks like you and so many others throughout the country, I mean, look at even great organizations like public broadcasting. Again, everybody's fighting tooth and nail for every dollar to try to continue to provide services and as well as good programming and good entertainment on all levels. Back to Bud. Interesting. This man's just filled with interesting stories. Anthony Quinn, Oscar nominated. I'm trying to think. Did he win for?
One supporting for. I want to say Viva Zapata.
Yes, Viva Zapata.
One of those Mexican films that he did in the 40s or 50s.
No, you're right.
He did win supporting.
And he won, or rather, he was nominated for Zorba the Greek, but did not win.
That is correct, which he should have won.
Yep. And he introduced you to a young lady at the time. Again, many may not remember her. If you're a Hitchcock fan, you remember this lady, Ruth Roman, in Hitchcock's Stranger on a Train and countless other films and television series. I remember seeing her on Bonanza, Gunsmoke, on and on and on. He and Tony Quinn introduced you to your future wife there, so you guys were married for several years.
Tony and I go back. He was sitting next to me and my dad at the screening of Blood and Sand in 1940, 41, and he was a close friend, and we remained close friends, both with my family and with Tony as he went through this amazing career, and eventually I think he was remarried for his fourth wife when I ran into him again, and he's got two beautiful children. His wife, Kathy Quinn, is part of our advisory board, and we're going to see her in October at the festival, and his daughter, Antonia, is walking the streets, so to speak, of New York as a young actress, and I'm trying to remember where Ryan is, her son now. I think he's going to become a doctor or something like that, but Tony and I go back a long time ago. He was quite an amazing character.
I know one of the things Bud and I talked about in setting up this interview, one of the things he's most proud of was, as you can imagine, quite a busy man during the 60s, 70s, 80s, even up till today, still trying to get parts and match stars up with potential TV, film, and roles, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things I know, or got the impression you're proud of, was that you were able to get Oscar nominations for three female actresses, and most people just think that of your work with Sidney Poitier, who, by the way, was the best man at your wedding to your current wife Carolyn, who you've been married to for some over 45 years.
Very good.
But Diane Cannon, Carrie Snodgrass, and Sally Kellerman. Now, what were the movies? I know them. Do you?
We got Bob Carroll, Ted and Alice for Diane Cannon.
Yes.
And we went to a reading over at Columbia Studios with Larry Tucker and Paul Mazursky, the two creators of the film. And they said to her after the reading, I came back into the office, Diane, it was a marvelous reading. We've got Natalie Wood, Bob Culp, the actor who married Barbra Streisand.
Elliot Gould.
Elliot Gould, thank you.
Yes.
And we are going to test three young ladies next Tuesday for the part of Alice. And she said, well, can't you fit me into the schedule? She says, no, we're pretty well set on that. So she said, I will come back and test for you anytime you want. And as we walked out, her ex-husband was Cary Grant. Her closest friend at Columbia Studio, and Cary Grant's closest friend, was the president of the studio by the name of Mike Frankovich, who used to be a quarterback or a football player at USC and eventually became the president of Columbia. I said, Diane, here's a quarter. I think that's what we needed to put into a payphone. I said, get Cary on the phone right this second. Tell him you just read for Larry Tucker, and tell Mike, if he needs anything to Cary Grant and to me, he will pick up the phone and call Larry Tucker and tell him to fit Diane Cannon into the testing next week. The call was made. Her test was so perfect, Larry, that they could have lifted it right out and put it into the movie. That's how she got that part.
There you go. Quick on his feet, Bud is. And that, of course, was before cell phones and all in texting. So imagine that. Carrie Snodgrass, Diary of a Mad Housewife, as you and I discussed off air.
That's another story, and the story with Sally Kelman itself.
Oh, from Mass, yes.
Very much like the Diane Cannon story.
Sally Kelman.
What really I found of all the people going back to 1963 was this very pale, very nervous, cold, wet palm hands every time she went out for a reading was a young Mia Farrow. And they were casting a new TV series called Peyton Place. And I took her by the hand to meet Paul Monash, who was a friend of mine from another television season. He fell in love with her, and he said, I'm going to put you into Peyton Place, which aired from 1964 to 1969, and she had the role of Allison that was played by Hope Lang in the original movie. Within the first year, she was at a dinner party, and Frank Sinatra was her dinner guest at the same table. And he kept saying to her, I hear you're a big success in Peyton Place, and if I can be of any help to you, I'd love to take you to lunch or take you to dinner. We can talk about your career. And she's standing there with her purse in her hand. And Larry, I had given her a little envelope with some 50 of my business cards. And I said, Mia, you're going to get hit on by more people at one time than any other actress in town because of Peyton Place. Whatever they say yes, it sounds great, I'd love to do it, but here's my agent's card, call him. And she's fumbling through her purse to find my business cards. Everything fell out of her purse. Her hair comb, her brush, and everything fell on the floor. And she finally found my card and said, Mr. Sinatra, I'd love to do it, but here's my agent's card, Bud Moss, call him. The next morning, I'm in the office at 9:30, and the phone rings, and my secretary said, Bud, Frank Sinatra's on the phone. And I said, yeah, and Mia and Marilyn Monroe's in the lobby waiting to meet me. And she says, no, it sounds like Frank Sinatra. So I picked up the phone. I said, hello. And he said, Bud Moss. And I said, yes. He said, Frank Sinatra. And I said, I know. He said, I have a kind of an embarrassing question to ask you. And he told me what happened the night before at the dinner party. And he said, Mia gave me your card and said, I'd love to have lunch with you, but call my agent. So I'm making the call. What can I do to make this thing work? And I said, Frank, let me call you back. And I hung up. I tracked Mia down. I said, Mia, I just got a call from Frank Sinatra. And she said, holy God, like Batman. She said, Frank Sinatra called you? And I said, yes. And when I told her the whole story, and she said, Bud, I got your card in my hand. What am I going to tell him? It's Frank Sinatra. Call Bud Moss. So I called him back. I said, Mia, have lunch, have dinner, whatever it is. And that, my friend Larry, opened the door for the time that they eventually got married the following year. And Sinatra said, it's about time for you to get out of the series. And he urged her to get out. And I think he got out of the show after 2 years in the series. And they then got married in 1966, and it was one of these hot-tempered marriages that lasted only 2 years. And she wanted to do a film called Rosemary Baby at the time with John Cassavetes, who was a client of our office at the time. And he says, if you do that movie with John Cassavetes, I'm going to divorce you. And she said, you better get the paperwork, Frank, not thinking that it was going to happen. The first day on the set of Rosemary Baby, Sinatra sent his lawyer there with divorce papers and handed them right to Mia on the set.
Wow. Holy cow. Well, I'll give her credit. She certainly got a little more feisty when talking to Frank, but still, yeah, that was, I can imagine sparks would have flown. So you're either deserving of a lot of credit or you're to blame. To take your pick.
Well, with that one, I'm not quite sure. At the beginning, I was taking all kinds of credit, but when that divorce came along, which was so ugly, I didn't even remember what her name was at that point. Did you know that story, Regina?
No.
No, Regina's still amazed at It's a Wonderful Life, because now she and I are going to watch that movie, and we're going to find you, bud.
I'm going to be slow-mo.
Yeah,
Film
we're going to say you're the one that pushed poor Jimmy Stewart into the drink there. So,
Right.
Oh my goodness, wonderful, wonderful stories here, and of course talking about the upcoming event. Regina Gill, founder, executive director of the Gold Coast Arts Center in Great Neck, the Gold Coast Arts Center, and their Film Festival. Thank you. I'm still mesmerized by that Frank Sinatra story that I'm fumbling. The annual Burton Moss Hollywood Golden Era Award that they will be bestowing to Robert Wagner, a well-known actor, of course. Those of you, I was saying to Bud, a lot of people, young people today, know him as number 2 from the Austin.
I was just going to say that.
From the Austin Powers movies, and if I ever get a chance to talk or meet with Mr. Wagner, that I don't know. I think there's. When Mike Myers wrote that, I think there's a joke in there somewhere. But anyway, of course, he was in Switch. He was in It Takes a Thief. Too many movies. Pink Panther movie. He did a movie with his later wife, Jill St. John, and just worked with, my goodness, Frank Sinatra as well. Kings Go Forth, I remember from the late 50s, just a man who's been constantly busy. And now, Bud, I forgot to ask, now, you grew up in Michigan, or isn't that where you guys went to school?
No, I grew up in the shadows of Sunset Boulevard. I was born and raised at the Hollywood Children's Hospital.
Okay, so Robert was born in Michigan, but then
that is correct.
His family as well as then, and then Joel Grey also was from California.
I can't answer that. I think it was either New York or California, but I mean, we went to junior high school together, which was like in the early 40s. So I assume he was born in L.A.
Yeah. And for those who might need a little refresher, because you'd be surprised how people's eyes light up when you tell them, well, if they don't know who Joel Grey is, you tell them, oh, Oscar winner, and then you tell them, oh, his daughter is Jennifer Grey, of course, Dirty Dancing.
Right, and I have a footnote for you, Larry.
Sure.
And Regina went to the opening of the first Yiddish production of Fiddler on the Roof that Joel just directed, and the whole play was in Yiddish, and I'm going to let you tell the story about how successful this play is.
Go ahead, Regina, you're up. Tell us about it.
Let's start with the actual location. It's at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, where the National Yiddish Theater has been putting on the first production of Fiddler on the Roof in the original language, in Yiddish, and with super titles like at the opera. And the director, and it's his first time directing, is Joel Grey. And let me tell you something, at the gala opening night, which is where I was privileged to attend, was Topo, who was Fiddler, who was Tevye in the movie, and Sheldon Harnick, who at the age of 95 is still going strong, and was thrilled that the show came out in this original language. But Joel Grey, he was, I have to tell you, he's a spectacular director. Everybody was moved, and it was like you were seeing it for the first time. Really great.
Amazing, amazing. She cleaned up that story very well. Thank you, Regina.
Just wanted to make sure. The president of that museum happens to be a friend of mine.
I love it. Oh, my goodness. Now, I noticed in a lot of large cities, okay, and this might apply to your organization, but to me, you probably will say the arts are vital no matter where, the suburban communities, big cities, but I think a lot of big cities, I know certainly here in Connecticut, the arts, or to have a strong arts presence, is vital and critical to many big cities in this country of ours. Would you agree? 100%.
And if you go down to Washington and you see the quotation that is emblazoned on the front of the Kennedy Center, JFK said, "A great civilization is not remembered," or I'm paraphrasing, "a great civilization is not remembered for its commerce. A great civilization is remembered for its arts."
Well said.
Well said. We've got a photo here that I wanted to get to when we're talking about Bud's first wife, Ruth Roman. A famous story in the remaining moments we have here on Studio 411. It's a photo of you, Bud. You look like you have some boots on, Ruth. And then there's a Spaniard who was a bullfighter. Help me out with the gentleman. Tell me a little bit about that period of time in your life.
This was somewhere in about 1957 in Sevilla, Spain. The picture is with probably at the time one of Spain's greatest bullfighters, a man who became one of my closest friends over the years. His name was Luis Miguel Dominguin, and if you have any aficionados out there that followed the bulls, they would know that he was one of the greats, along with Manolete and Carlos Arusa, one of the great Mexican bullfighters. And we remained close friends all through the years until, sadly, he passed away. But he was the bullfighter that took Frank Sinatra, that took Ava Gardner away from, took Ava Gardner away from Frank Sinatra when they had when they broke up. He's very romantic looking. Anybody have a chance to Google Luis Miguel Dominguin? He was quite attractive.
Oh, we're looking at a photo of him right now. I'm starting to see a pattern here. Regina, tell me if you agree. Anytime Bud's involved with anyone that Frank Sinatra was seeing, that usually was bad news.
He ruins it for them.
I'm
totally flat tire.
I know. I'm assuming that he had no interaction with his last wife, Barbara. So or maybe Bud knew the former Nancy Sinatra Senior. Okay, and of course, let's not forget
Nancy Senior. But I did, going back to my agent days, represent Nancy. I put her into one of her first acting roles at MGM Studios called Man from U.N.C.L.E., and she actually had a very good presence in the series, and it was her first job. And I got a call from the head of the studio a week later who said, Bud, we're going to do a new television series called Sunday in New York, and we want to test Nancy Sinatra for the Jane Fonda part. So I went in and I told my boss about the phone call from the head of the studio, and my boss said, Bud, who are you talking about? And I said, Nancy Sinatra. He said, what's her last name again? I said, Sinatra. He said, Bud, Nancy Sinatra does not test. If they want her for the part, give him my phone number, and I'd be happy to make the contract. I said, but I talked to Nancy, and she wants to test. And he says, I'm telling you that she's not going to test. And I said, well, if she doesn't test, I'm going to quit. And he says, if you're going to put her in the thing, you're fired. And I have to tell you, that was the conduit in 1968 that allowed me to quit and get out of the agency business and open my own office because of Nancy Sinatra and Sunday in New York. And years later, I had to tell her the story, and she couldn't believe that she was the one that caused me to leave my agency.
Wow. And Regina, I just dawned on me, remember, Bud's longtime association and friendship, both as a client and as a good friend with Rita Hayworth, there's another Sinatra connection. So you see what I'm saying?
Was there?
So I'm saying that there's, that Bud is like, he's a marvelous man. I love him to death, but he definitely, that's his Achilles heel, was anybody to do with Frank Sinatra. I didn't put that together until he was telling us these stories. My goodness, there you go. That'll be that'll be the title of his next book. Me and Frank.
Well, don't laugh. I'm been pushing a lot of papers around. I've got like about 50 pages of notes, and I'm close to saying to Regina, depending on what happens this year, I think I'm going to sit down and take some time off and write my third book, which is going to be called Act 3.
There you go. There you go. I like Me and Frank.
I have a part in it.
Say again?
Pardon me?
Do I have a part in that play?
I already had, most of the stuff was deleted by my co-writer that just didn't think that there was just too much there that can't be told about you.
There you go. Oh boy, this is going to be.
Fast forward.
It's going to be.
Fast forward to 2017, and we had Frank Sinatra's we had Nancy Sinatra's. Was it her daughter?
Granddaughter.
Granddaughter, right?
Granddaughter, yeah.
Granddaughter. And she came out for the screening of Pal Joey. We did a vintage screening of Pal Joey, so we had the Hayworth Sinatra grandchildren, no, one daughter, one grandchild, connected through that screening.
Do you know, by the way, that when that film was put together and they were ready to start putting up the titles, that Frank Sinatra insisted that Rita get billing before him, and it read Frank Sinatra, Rita Hayworth, Frank Sinatra, Kim Novak. He would not take first billing.
There you go. Regina Gill, founder and executive director of the Gold Coast Arts Center and also the Gold Coast International Film Festival, upcoming in October in Great Neck, Long Island. Regina, if you would give us the website for more information.
Sure. It's goldcoastarts.org, O-R-G.
And they will be bestowing the second annual Burton Moss Hollywood Golden Era Award to the well-deserving actor Robert Wagner, so that should be a lot of fun. And I've had a ball here with you guys. You've been kind enough to indulge us and share some great information as well as some great stories. And again, I'm indebted to you both, and we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, my dear friend. It was very enjoyable. Regina, it was nice talking to you after a whole day without hearing your lovely voice.
Didn't we start the day that way?
There you go.
Oh,
all right, and we thank you for joining us here on this episode of Studio 411. Larry Dasilva is my name. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Take care.